They're talking about it again, ongoing $2,000 monthly checks. But what's coming this time might actually change the game for people living on fixed incomes, and the reason behind it will honestly shock you. So stay with me to the end because what you'll hear there will make you rethink everything about how these payments could work and who really deserves them. Now let's get right into it. There's a major discussion happening in Washington and across several economic think tanks about a new approach to stimulus support. Not for everyone, not for all 85% of Americans like before, but for the right group, for people like you, those living on limited income, retirees, and low earners who keep this economy turning day by day. And the logic behind this is surprisingly smart. Before we go too far, comment your age and state. I'd love to know who's out there planning smarter than the rest, because what's coming next could impact you more than anyone else watching right now. All right, let's take a look at how we got here. Back in 2020 and 2021, the US sent out 3 rounds of stimulus checks totaling about $850 billion. Nearly 85% of the population received those payments, and yes, it helped for a moment, but the aftershocks were huge. The massive wave of spending paired with supply chain chaos and $6 trillion printed overall sparked the inflation we've been wrestling with ever since. Groceries, rent, utilities, they all jumped. And many seniors on Social Security have been feeling the squeeze harder than anyone else. But here's what's fascinating. Economists now say it wasn't the idea of the checks that caused the problem. It was how they were distributed. They went too wide. People who didn't actually need the help got it anyway. And a lot of that money just sat in savings accounts. Meanwhile, lower-income Americans, those who would have spent the money immediately on essentials, got too little too late. That's where the new proposal comes in. This time, instead of casting a wide net, the idea is to focus narrowly on those at the bottom, 25 to 30% of earners. These are the folks who actually spend when they get financial relief. Economists call it a high marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Sounds technical, but it's simple. People who need the money most tend to use it fastest, and that's what keeps an economy alive. Now imagine this. Instead of $850 billion going to almost everyone, that same money could be redirected, stretched out over several months, and sent only to the low-income population. The math shows it would have the same stimulative effect on the economy without triggering the runaway inflation we've all suffered from these past few years. It's a targeted, smarter form of support, and for many seniors, it could mean a lifeline that actually lasts. But the real shock is what's hidden inside this new plan. And that's exactly what we're diving into next, because the way they've structured it could finally be the first time the system truly works for the people who need it most. Now here's where things start to get really interesting. The proposal that's being discussed today doesn't just stop at saying, let's help the low-income group. It goes further. It lays out exactly how it could work without repeating the same chaos of 2020. Because this time the checks wouldn't be one-off handouts. They'd be ongoing monthly support of around $2,000, but laser focused on those who need it most. The people living paycheck to paycheck, or in many cases benefit check to benefit check. And before you say, we've heard that before, here's the twist. The data now backs it up. Economists have studied exactly what happens when a lower income household receives $2,000. Within 10 days, they spend about 80% of it, mostly on essentials, rent, food, medication, car repairs, utilities, the everyday costs that keep them afloat. The remaining 20% is usually gone within the next month. And that spending doesn't just help one person, it moves through the whole economy. Every dollar turns into income for someone else. Store clerks, truck drivers, farmers, manufacturers. It's the ripple effect that fuels growth, and it starts right at the bottom. Now compare that to higher earners. When they received stimulus checks back in 2020, most of them saved it. They held onto it for a rainy day, or invested it, or simply parked it in the bank. That might sound responsible, but it defeats the purpose of a stimulus. The whole point of these checks is to stimulate spending, to keep the economy breathing. That's why this new direction, smaller group, faster spending actually makes sense, And for retirees, this hits even closer to home. Because when you're on Social Security, a fixed pension, or small savings, every unexpected expense feels heavier. Inflation doesn't care that your income doesn't grow every year. Groceries don't pause, utilities don't wait. So, a system that directs extra support where it's actually used right away could make a real difference, not in theory, but in daily life. Here's the part that might surprise you. According to recent reports, the government could distribute several rounds of $2,000 monthly checks to that focused low income group for the same total cost as the three big stimulus rounds from 2020. In other words, they could spend the same amount of money, but this time it would go further, last longer, and deliver stronger results. It's like fixing a leak by sealing the right pipe instead of flooding the whole house. But let's be honest, it's not just about math, it's also about timing. We're already seeing signs of economic slowdown, whispers of a potential recession on the horizon. And if that downturn deepens, history shows what always happens. They print money. They always do. The difference now is whether they finally learned their lesson. Will they repeat the mistakes of 2020? Or use what we've learned to protect the people who actually keep this country running? And that's where the debate gets real, because what's being discussed behind the scenes right now could set the tone for how the next big wave of economic help is rolled out. The question is, will retirees and low-income Americans finally be first in line or forgotten again? Stick with me, because in the next part, I'll show you exactly what signs are already appearing. The reports, the numbers, and the clues that this plan isn't just talk anymore. It's closer to reality than most people think. And if it happens, it could completely reshape how financial aid works in America. Here's where the pieces start connecting, and it's the part most people aren't paying attention to. Right now, several economic reports are quietly signaling what could be the start of the next major slowdown. Consumer debt is at record highs. Credit card delinquencies are climbing faster than they did even before the 2008 crisis. Savings rates are near zero, and the Federal Reserve, despite all its efforts, is boxed in. If they cut rates, inflation might roar back. If they keep them high, everyday Americans will keep drowning. So, what happens next? Historically, every time the economy hits this wall, they stimulate. It's the one move that always ends up on the table. But this time, the pressure is different. Lawmakers know the public won't accept another blanket giveaway like in 2020. The push now is for targeted relief, especially for low-income households and seniors, the same group that's been hit hardest by rising prices but left out of the recovery. If you've noticed, conversations around direct aid have started surfacing again on economic panels, even if the headlines aren't shouting it yet. Reports from the Congressional Budget Office and a few leading research institutes are already mapping potential scenarios, not for universal checks, but for income-based monthly relief. It's not official policy yet, but it's being modeled quietly, carefully, and very intentionally. And here's why that matters. In those projections, the group most likely to benefit first are people over 60 living on less than $45,000 a year. That's not a guess. It's based on what economists call economic impact per dollar distributed. In plain language, it means every dollar sent to someone who actually needs it produces almost double the effect compared to sending that same dollar to someone who doesn't. You buy groceries, the store more food, the supplier hires more drivers, the farmer plants more crops. It's the cycle that keeps everything turning. And that's why the low-income sector, especially retirees, are finally being seen not as a cost, but as an engine. Still, there's hesitation. Some lawmakers fear it'll reignite inflation. Others argue it's the only real way to stabilize things for those who can't just pick up a second job. But here's what makes this round different. The new proposals are budget neutral. Instead of printing another mountain of cash, they'd reallocate unused pandemic funds, combine them with new tax revenue from large corporate surpluses, and redirect that into monthly low-income support. No new money flooding the system, just smarter use of what's already there. It's a bold idea, and if executed right, it could actually balance growth and stability for the first time in years. But here's the kicker. If this gets approved, it wouldn't roll out like before. No mass mailing, no everyone gets a check chaos. It'd likely run through an updated IRS portal tied directly to verified income data and Social Security records, meaning seniors could receive automatic deposits with no forms, no delays, and no confusion. That's why I say the framework is already being built. It's not a rumor anymore. Quiet testing is happening under other programs. You might not see it on the news, but the gears are turning. Now, if this all sounds too good to be true, just wait until you hear what's buried deep in these reports. The one provision that could make or break the whole plan. It's something most people haven't even noticed yet. But if it goes through, it could finally tilt the system in favor of regular Americans instead of big corporations. That's what we'll get into next. And trust me, the detail I'll share there is the part that'll leave you stunned. All right, here's the part that very few people are talking about, and it's the one detail that could turn this whole idea upside down. Hidden inside one of the recent economic recovery drafts is a clause suggesting that these $2,000 monthly checks wouldn't just be temporary emergency relief. They could be structured as a long-term stabilizer for low-income and retired Americans. In other words, instead of cutting support off after a few months, the system could automatically extend it based on inflation levels or economic stress indicators. Think about that for a second. A safety net that adjusts with the economy instead of reacting years later when it's already too late. It means if grocery prices spike again or gas suddenly jumps, those checks could continue automatically for a set period. No new votes, no gridlock. For the first time, financial relief could work on autopilot. And that is what shocked me when I saw it, because it means Washington might finally be thinking ahead, not just reacting when things break. Now, this wouldn't be a free-for-all. Eligibility would stay tight, focused on low-income individuals, retirees, and those with limited savings. But the effect could be massive. Economists estimate that if even half of eligible households receive these ongoing payments, it could lift nearly 10 million Americans above the poverty line within months. And for those of you living on fixed incomes, it wouldn't just mean breathing room, it would mean independence. No more choosing between paying the power bill and refilling prescriptions. No more wondering if you can afford both groceries and a tank of gas in the same week. But here's the other side, and it's why this isn't headline news yet. Critics argue that even a targeted approach could still pressure if not managed carefully. That's why the plan links every new payment to spending data. If prices rise too fast, payments pause automatically until inflation cools. It's a self-balancing system, something economists have dreamed of for decades, but never managed to build until now. So yes, it's bold, it's experimental, but it's also the most logical path forward we've seen in years. And for seniors especially, it represents something deeper than money. It's stability, it's respect. It's finally being prioritized instead of forgotten. If you've made it this far, you already see the bigger picture. This isn't about handouts, it's about smarter economics, fairer systems, and a chance to fix what broke years ago. And the fact that we're even this close to seeing such an idea taken seriously means someone out there is finally listening. Now, I'd love to know what you think. Would you support a system like this? Automatic relief for those who actually need it, triggered by real data instead of politics. Comment your thoughts below. I read every single one. And hey, if you found this video valuable or even just eye-opening, consider subscribing. It's completely free, but it helps more than you know. The more people hear about ideas like this, the more pressure there is to make them real. So, take care of yourself, stay informed, and keep an eye on what's coming next. Because if this plan moves forward, it could change everything for millions of people who've been waiting far too long for something to finally work in their favor.